This is the Samson V, moored permanently here at Westminster Quay in New Westminster. It's a maritime museum dedicated to the life and activities along the Fraser River. Hello, I'm Archie Miller, and I want to welcome you to a program on part of the history and heritage of the Fraser River. At one time, there were hundreds of vessels, paddle wheel vessels like the Samson, on the Fraser River. There were hundreds of others on the other rivers of North America. Today, there's just a handful of the original ones, like the Samson, still available. Please stay with us for the next half hour as we bring you Paddlewheelers on the Fraser.
Take me back to the steamboat days, when the paddle wheel was king on the Fraser, from the Sandheads up to Yale. Let me feel a paddle throb to the captain's full-speed ring, when a steamboat race was a kind of holy grail. A paddle boat could pack a load, but didn't draw much water, and according to her captain and her crew, she could climb up on a riverbank, then slip off like an otter, or navigate quite well on heavy dew. The Fraser and the paddle boats were rivaling companions. They'd frolic where the river twists and turns, they'd chuckle in the straightaways, they'd wrestle in the canyons. But the Fraser always won once she got stern. The Mississippi River is much slower, broader, longer, and much better known, as Mark Twain had to say. But the Fraser is a brawler, and she's brasher, swifter, stronger, and she knew more paddle wheelers in her day. So chuck the cordwood on, boys, all the pitch pine you can get. Make the sparks fly and the paddles churn up foam. Tie the steam valve down, boys, for we ain't been beaten yet. Tell the timid folks they should have stayed at home. Fire the guns and anvils, for we had a record run. Strike up the band and open up a cask. Take me back to the Fraser. That was my place in the sun. Take me back, and it's all I'll ever ask.
The Samson V did not carry passengers. The Samson V was a workboat. She's known as a snag puller. They pulled the deadheads, the snags in the river, to keep the river free of problems with navigation, to keep it easy for the boats to use. There were 5 of them, obviously, going from the 1880s until just about 10 years ago. The Samson is a reminder of those vessels that worked this river, that made the river open for navigation and made the river what it is today. It took the paddle boats more than 2,000 years to find the Fraser River. The idea of using paddle wheels to propel a boat dates back to the Romans, who harnessed oxen to a type of treadmill which drove revolving wheels. That worked in calm waters, but in heavy seas the oxen couldn't stay on their feet, so the idea was dropped. The little steamer Charlotte Dundas demonstrated the potential of steam-driven paddle wheels in 1802, when she towed barges up and down the Clyde Canal in Scotland. But this vessel was abandoned because it was feared that the wash from her paddle wheel would damage the canal banks. American businessman Robert Fulton launched the Clermont, the first commercially successful paddle wheeler, on the Hudson River in 1807. One observer described the Clermont as looking like a backwoods sawmill mounted on a scow and set on fire. By 1810, Fulton was running 2 more paddle wheelers on the Hudson, and in 1811 he designed the New Orleans, the first steamboat to operate on the Mississippi River. The type of steamboats that began to emerge were specially tailored for rivers like the Fraser. They had a shallow draft and could make a mud landing, unload, and then back out into the stream. They could slip through narrow canyons and run so close to shore that passengers could pick flowers from the banks. It took the paddle wheels more than 2,000 years to find the Fraser. But when they did find her, they found their natural home. Of the paddle wheel steamboats, there were two types. There was the side wheeler and the stern wheeler. The Samson V behind me is a stern wheeler. And simply put, that means that the wheel, the paddle that drives the vessel, is located at the back of the boat, the stern. On a side wheeler, they're located on the side. On a river like the Fraser, a river that is fast and not that wide, you may think the Fraser is wide, it is not that wide. The stern wheeler is excellent. It allows the vessel to maintain steam and headway. It allows it to climb over small sandbars. It was said that some of these vessels would go on dew, go on just a few feet of water. The paddles pick up the water, dig into it, and propel the vessel. If you just turn the paddle very slowly, that vessel will sit dead in the water and stay there forever, as long as you have steam up. The stern wheeler was an excellent vessel. I went to sea as a young lad in sailing ships, 7 seas to the Orient. I found on the rivers, I found the same intrigue and romance that I had found on the high seas. You were still at sea. You were still with the vessels that were your home, that were your life. I wouldn't have had it any other way. It was an era bursting with gold rush gusto. It was a rousing era of spirits by the barrel and nuggets by the ton. And for adventurers from all parts of the world and all walks of life, the lower Fraser River was a gateway to El Dorado. Beginning in 1858, 30,000 gold seekers swarmed up the Fraser. At first, they paddled canoes or pulled rafts to reach the diggings, but soon the pulse of the paddle wheel was heard along the river. The stern wheelers were at home on the Fraser. They could nose into the riverbank, then back off. They could walk over riffles or on a tether of sand. Their crews bragged that they could run anywhere it was damp. It was an era of sandbars, snags, and searing explosions, when the life expectancy of the average paddle boat was only 5 years, and passengers were advised to buy lots of insurance and pray. Racing on the river was a dangerous but accepted practice, as the fastest boat was the most popular boat and drew the most paying customers. When a steamboat race started, the excitement was contagious. Firemen sometimes threw sacks of bacon into furnaces until the fire roared like a strong east wind, and passengers lined decks to shout encouragement to their captain and throw eggs or even take pot shots at the pilot house of the rival steamboat. It was an era when the Fraser River and the Caribou gold rushes were at their roaring best. It was the rousing era of adventure's chase, the paddle's grace, and the steamboat race. It was the romantic era of the steamboat days, and those who were there never forgot it. Of all the aspects of this maritime heritage of the Fraser River, one aspect which truly does capture public attention is the thought of these huge stern wheelers racing each other. Why did they race? Well, they were competitive. They were business people. Some of the races were for fun, but for the most part, the racing was to get from point A to point B ahead of the other guy, to get to the dock. If you got to the dock ahead of him, you got the cargo and the passengers and the livestock, and you made the money. Now, you've got to imagine the type of person it would take to stand at the helm and to run your vessel full steam up, running bow to bow with another vessel to get to that dock. Your vessel is loaded with passengers, with everything, and you're racing on the river. An interesting sort of person. The captains of the Fraser River were an interesting group.
One exam for river captains was to draw a river chart of towns and islands, sandbars, snags, and landings. But the real test was if we knew the river's ways by heart, by instinct, second sight, and understanding. Like knowing morning mist creeps from a tributary stream, and learning tree-line silhouettes by sight, or knowing river riffles sometimes aren't quite what they seem, and how to find a woodyard in the night. I was a captain on the Fraser, though I wasn't certified. In those early snag and sandbar dodging days, it was being a a deck and engine man that made me qualified, and handling men and knowing riverways. If there's one thing that a river pilot never will forget, it's that first trip on the river on his own. Oh, it's the way his heart was singing and his forehead damp with sweat on that first trip in the pilot house, alone. On the quiet summer day that William Irving passed away, all New Westminster's flags flew at half-mast. And folks who didn't know his tall son John were heard to say, the lad could never match his father's past. But John understood the Fraser and the riverboats and more. Oh, he could drink and fight with any man in town. When he took the Onward up to Yale, the settlers lined the shore and cheered him going up and coming down. The captains on the Fraser were a superstitious breed, aware of all that happened on their decks. Oh, it was ingrained in their characters, their principles, their creed, to be aware of bad luck or a hex. John Irving found a gray horse and a parson brought a curse. That's why one time at Chilliwack he roared, "Haul aboard the gangplank, boys, the horse was boarded first," and left a parson shouting on the shore.
My other friends, the other captains on the river, they were interesting characters. Some drank too much. They all smoked their pipes, cigars. Oh, cigars, large, smelly cigars. I didn't smoke. I also didn't swear and really didn't drink either. When I would get agitated, I walk the length of a quarterdeck. I pace back and forth. My family knows when not to disturb me. It was an interesting life, and my other friends and the competition were interesting people. They were all individuals. Some were tough, some were not so tough. But it was a difficult business, it was a difficult time, and we all did our best. Most steamboat skippers were men of substance and integrity, and every kid in town knew them by name. Technically, only skippers who owned their own vessel qualified to be called captain. But river pilots were called captain too, and regardless of his age, the skipper in the wheelhouse was always referred to by the crew as the old man. William "Billy" Moore was one of the Fraser's most colorful captains. First went to sea at the age of 7 and prospected for gold in California and Peru before coming to the Fraser. Moore went on to found the gold rush town of Skagway, pioneer other rivers, and win and lose several fortunes. Best known and most respected of the river captains was William Irving. He was a leader in all aspects of the community and was mourned along the river when he died suddenly in 1872. His son, John Irving, was described as well over 6 feet in height, handsome, a consummate river skipper, a two-fisted fighter, a great social favorite, a mighty drinker, and the soul of generosity. He was only 18 years of age when he took over the family steamboat business. Fast-talking, hard-drinking, ambitious, and colorful, John "Gassy Jack" Dayton, who started up Vancouver, was the most picturesque of the Fraser River pilots. Gassy Jack is buried in New Westminster, overlooking a broad expanse of the Fraser River. A steamboat man made pilot on ability, and there was something intuitive about those who did make it. They all had nerve and wit, and were good at judging distances. Being a good pilot was something like being a concert pianist. Some made it, but most didn't. This is the boiler area, the engine room on the Samson V. This is the area that attracts a lot of attention. This is the boiler that produces the power. All these pipes in here produce the steam power, which is translated to the stern of the vessel into the various pistons and rocker arms, which then turn the wheel and make the boat go. This is the area, though, that's always under extreme pressure when you're operating at full steam to operate the vessel. This is the area of the early stern wheelers that caused the trouble, because when you played with the steam gauges and you ran at over steam, this is the part of the vessel that would blow up.
A boat trip up the Fraser in the Paddlewheeler days was a journey you weren't likely to forget. The era was unique, a time apart in many ways. The impressions that it made are with me yet. You'd start at New Westminster, a bustling frontier place made up of shacks and stumps and boardwalk planks, and canneries and sawmills running at a hurried pace, strung out between the woods and riverbank. Lined up far down Front Street, there'd be horse-drawn carts and drays bringing cargo to the steamboat through the night. Shouted orders, screeching wheels, and horses' stomps and neighs, mixed and blended with the river's smells and sights. The passengers that Fraser River Paddlewheelers carried included horses, oxen, cows, and mules. The cargo manifest was mixed and marvelously varied. It ranged from bric-a-brac to blacksmith's tools. There were blankets, rugs, corsets, crockery and lace, wines and gins, and French and Spanish brandies. There was flour by the barrel, pheasant by the brace, and fancy duds for damsels, dudes, and dandies. Near dawn, the folks start boarding. The first ones take their time, but soon late risers scurry up the ramp. The rail is lined with settlers, miners, showgirls past their prime, all bound for landings or the mining camps. The captain climbs the wheelhouse stairs, the paddle slowly turning. He plants his feet apart and taps the clock. The whistle blows. Its echoes spread a melancholy yearning. The lines are freed and cast off from the dock. The paddle tests its power and the vessel eases back. The morning sun ignites the paddle spray. The Fraser River's waiting. The tide is flat and slack. The paddle churns. Our journey's underway.
Accommodations for passengers on our boats were often not very good. They were adequate on a number. My vessels had accommodations for passengers, but many others were meant simply to move people. The coal dust would come down and get on your clothes, and you'd be filthy. It was on all the surfaces. The sparks from the stack of the vessels would go down and burn holes in their clothing. Why, we used to find people sleeping under tables, on tables. Such was life for a passenger. You may have even had to cook your own meal, and we often charged you for the fuel to do that. Life for a passenger wasn't good, but then you were really just getting somewhere, because your future was ahead of you when you did get there. The paddle wheel era was a drama. The Fraser River was the stage, and New Westminster held the best seats in the house. By the 1880s, New Westminster was a unique blend of early Victorian England and the American West. Most paddle boats traveling from Victoria to upriver landing points stopped at the river town overnight, then continued their journey upstream in the morning. Depending on their taste and pocketbooks, passengers stopping over could find home-style cooking at Hardy's Eatery or pheasant and champagne at the elegant Colonial Hotel. The next morning, back on the river, first-class passengers took breakfast at tables in the main saloon. Then ladies strolled the decks to see the sights, and gentlemen retreated to the bar. The Fraser became the great highway of the infant colony. Her signposts were the snags and sandbars and the dozens of landings named after the settlers who had preempted farmland along the river. The paddle-wheelers had a unique set of sounds. The steady slap of the paddles on the river, the puff of escaping smoke and steam that sounded like a locomotive leaving a station, the musical sounds made by the bells and chimes that used to signal the engine room, and the screech and toot made by the steam whistle when approaching or leaving a landing that was different for each vessel and a distinct part of its personality. When a paddle boat blew its whistle for a landing, every dog around started howling, and settlers dropped what they were doing and headed for the river shouting, "Steamboat! Steamboat!" This is one of the cabins on board the Samson V, and my friend and I might have stayed in this cabin. We have to remember that the Samson V was a work boat, and so the people who were on here, they had accommodations as they worked their whole shift, and so they lived on board the vessel. On the stern wheelers we've been talking about, the accommodations for crew were not often very good. They would have a place for you to sleep and stay, but nothing necessarily like a separate cabin. The captain and the mate might have had a place to go. Accommodations for passengers was equally different, going from vessels like the R.P. Rithett, which was truly luxurious, to other vessels in which they were very crude or non-existent for passenger accommodations. The vessels that we hear a lot about, the Wilson G. Hunt, the Yosemite, the Enterprise, the Onward, the Reliance, the Colonel Moody, and so on, these vessels are all very much a part of this maritime heritage.
The Wright Sternwheeler Union soon got nicknamed for a quirk that always gave the railbirds quite a show. The settlers on the river fondly called her Sudden Jerk, for she had to take a run to start a tow. She had very little power, and her pressure used to drop when the skipper yarded on the whistle cord. The result was that her paddle used to slow right down, then stop, to the horror of new passengers on board. But if Jerk was underpowered, then her running gear was worse, and she soon became the scourge of docks and piers. For the builders gave her forward, but they plumb forgot reverse. So to stall her, they tossed sacks into her gears. She had a string of skippers who found novel ways to cope. The crew said life below was never dull. They tied her engine to a buoy with several coils of rope in case the engine dropped right through the hull.
With life on the river, one of the constant hazards was the fear of explosion. You could have had your vessel run into a sandbar or hit a deadhead. Other things could have happened to you, but because the rules were frequently played fast and loose with, the steam gauges altered, vessels blew up. I won't say they blew up with great regularity, but they did blow up. You find that you hear stories, you read the stories about a boat, most of it disappearing, people blown into the air, never to be seen again. Such is the story of one particular family, because the accidents, the explosions, death on the river occurs to one family more than once. And this is the story of the Jameson family.
When the Jamesons left Scotland for the great northwest frontier, fate was waiting for them on a paddle boat. For all five of them elected a riverboat career and would crew on any vessel that would float. The first was killed when blasted through an outside cabin wall when Gazelle blew up while loading at a quay. Then young Robert died when Portland tumbled down a waterfall, and the last three brothers headed for BC. William Irving was a passenger as Hope townsite drew near, and the fast Fort Yale was putting on a show. He suggested to Smith Jameson he'd take the wheel and steer. When the captain turned him down, he went below. Suddenly, the boiler blew, and the pilot house went flying. One passenger was blasted to high ground. Irving bobbed up midst the wreckage and the people dead and dying. No trace of Jameson was ever found. Archie Jameson was captain, brother James was engineer when the Caribou cast off before first light. The watchmen making rounds that night had felt a tinge of fear. Something in the engine room just wasn't right. The novice fireman's head of steam seemed much more than they'd need for 8 passengers and 30 tons of freight. Then, when the captain rang for slow, but the paddles thrashed full speed, he knew the lad below was tempting fate. Victorians were startled by the sudden pre-dawn blast, closely followed by a horse's anguished scream. The ball of flame that lit the sky was violent and vast, before collapsing to a cloud of smoke and steam. The cries for help were carried by the low-lying moonlit fog till the nearby Songhe Indians arrived. Saved were 7 passengers, a horse, and a large black dog. Neither of the last 2 Jamesons survived.
What has become of the paddle's rhythm on the river in the white wishbone wake? What has become of the mournful whistle call for the landing? Beginning in 1886, only 3 decades after the first paddlewheeler threshed her way up the Fraser to the gold diggings, the sound of the paddle began to fade when the CPR changed travel patterns along the river. The sternwheelers were not displaced all at once and continued serving more than 30 landings between New Westminster and Chilliwack. Then in 1910, an electric railway linked New Westminster to Chilliwack, and the sternwheelers couldn't compete with its speed and convenience. The last sternwheeler to service Fraser River landing places was the Skeena, brought to New Westminster by Captain Charles Seymour in 1914. During her decade of service, the Vancouver province observed that as she sails week after week past the low shores of Surrey, Langley and Matsqui, of Coquitlam, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge and Mission, she seems to carry some of that nearly dead romance of the river. She wears still that air of simple dignity particular to the pioneer. When Captain Seymour died in 1925, the New Westminster Board of Trade failed to find a way to keep the Skeena operating, and she was auctioned to Ewan's Cannery for $5,000 and converted to a floating boarding house. The stately progress of the sternwheeler, the creamy wash, and the pennant of smoke linger on in the memories of those who were there. But how quickly the paddle wheel era became lost in time. How soon the sound of the paddles passing has grown as faint as the far and final echo of a haunting whistle call in the night. We've heard lots of stories about the river. We've seen lots of pictures of the people, the vessels that make up this history of the Fraser River. It's so important that we remember this history, that we remember this part of our heritage. The collections of the Samson V, the vessel we've been on here today, the collections of Irving House Historic Center and the New Westminster Museum are strongly dedicated to life along the Fraser here at New Westminster, but the stories of the vessels, the captains, the people, they're the stories of the Fraser River, from here to the communities of Hope and Yale, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, Steveston at the mouth, Ladner, and of course here for New Westminster. It's so important that we remember this heritage. This is our maritime heritage. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Those sandbar, snag, and steamboat days are in the distant past. There'll never be another gassy jack. Even memories and remnants of those days are fading fast. All the wishing in the world won't bring them back. So when you stroll along the Fraser, where the old docks used to be, and you come upon the stately Samson V, imagine that her whistle echoes through Westminster Quay, and pretend her paddle wheel has come alive. Picture settlers and dance hall girls and miners at her rail, and her crew's made up of men who understand that a paddle boat's a pilgrim, and the river is a trail, and the river is more blessed than the land. Bells are rung, lines cast off, now she's underway. That's stocky William Irving at the helm. See her swing to meet the current with the grace of a ballet, like a vision from that vanished river realm.